Welcome back, my friends, to another exciting organ road trip adventure. Off of the success of my video last week, my brother Billy is back in the car with me to help me film today. He also has a very valuable function. Last week, I went out to a church in Dorset, which is disused and has been for about 20 years, and it's now under the care of the Friends of Friendless Churches, a charity who looks after disused buildings. When I went to see the organ in this church just to see if it worked, I found it almost unplayable, and the key word is almost. So with Billy's help, he plays a number of instruments, but mainly the piano and the classical guitar. We're hoping we can bring some life into this instrument and help it out. We were back on the road again, heading to one of my favourite English counties. Dorset stretches all the way from the New Forest to Lyme Regis, and coming out here always reminds me of childhood holidays, especially on a day as beautiful as this one. Billy is my 19-year-old brother, and while he got used to my equipment, I drove on to a tiny hamlet called Long Critchell, which is in the chalkland of the Cranbourne Chase, about 5 miles from Blandford Forum. So here we are. We have arrived in a very gentle and quiet village of Long Critchell in Dorset. And in front of us here is St Mary's Church. It was pouring with rain this morning when I was getting the equipment ready for this trip, but it's now bright sunshine, and I must say this is what I would describe as the perfect weather for an organ road trip, so I can't wait to get started. Not quite perfect, because the wind was really beginning to pick up, but the church still looked spectacular, and my new microphone really proved its worth. In the last decade, about 2,000 churches were declared redundant. This one was actually disused from 2001, declared redundant 2 years later, and then in 2011 it was placed under the care of the Friends of Friendless Churches. The Friends are saviours of buildings like this one. Founded in 1957, they're a charity who maintain disused churches so that the local community and visitors can continue to enjoy them. Though it's not used for worship, there's nothing derelict about this building. With an old rectory to the east, a farmhouse to the west and fields beyond, this is a pretty scene of Englishness in a blend of architectural styles. The tower here is late medieval, but the rest of the church was almost completely rebuilt by the Victorians in about 1852. Let's go inside. It's really unusual that there's no porch here. We open the door and go straight into this bright and spacious nave, which Pevsner, the architect who surveyed plenty of churches around Wiltshire and Dorset, described as being like a schoolroom. For a long time it wasn't known who'd restored the church, but eventually evidence was found which pointed towards some very surprising names. Philip Hardwick, designer of the Great Hall in Euston Station, is credited with the west door, and William Byrne and McVicar Anderson also worked here. These last two were much more famous for their country houses, which might explain the secular feel to the church ceiling. And as we head into the sanctuary, perhaps the most elegant part of this church, the decorations of the roof and the windows, This was restored by the Friends of Friendless Churches very recently, actually. That's why it looks so beautiful and bright.
In recent years, metal was sadly stolen from the roof, causing the timber to rot and the walls to turn algal green. Thankfully, in 2021, the Friends were able to complete a full restoration, painstakingly reinstating the original late Georgian colour scheme, which had been covered over in the 1980s.
And just from spending a few moments in this church, you can tell that there is a wonderful acoustic here. And the primary reason for Billy and I being here is to make some music in this building. And it seems like the perfect church to do that. Now, last week I actually came here just for an hour or so to look at the organ. I do that quite often. Otherwise I turn up with a book of César Franck, a book of Elgar, and 4 hymn books, and I can't play a single thing from any of them. That is certainly the case here. This is a Story and Clark reed organ. No pipes, just reeds. It works in a very similar way to a harmonica or an accordion. Air passes through the reeds to create the sound, and the way that you create the air is by pumping with your feet. Normally a harmonium can sustain a constant pitch and they can be very expressive. In fact, I've filmed 2 or 3 videos playing these kind of instruments. The problem with this one is it looked to me like there are some big holes in the bellows. In other words, it cannot sustain a pitch. All you can do is huff. Even if I were to use both pedals, you still wouldn't be able to sustain a note. Let me show you. Okay, so now I have a chair. I can sit down and I can use both pedals as these instruments should be used. This is my Glenn Gould position. Say if I pump with both my feet. Ordinarily, as was the case last week at Fuggleston, it should fill the reservoir with air so that we can sustain notes. I don't feel any resistance to what I'm doing. That means there's probably holes in the bellows. In other words, this instrument is not storing any air, air is merely passing through it. So I can just about get a wispy chord out of it, but it won't sustain a nice smooth flowing line, and it certainly can't play melodies. Fairly hopeless as far as making music is concerned. The best I can do, really, is to remove the chair and give it as much welly as I can with my right trainer and just play a kind of Vivaldi-esque accompaniment.
The panting and wheezing you're hearing is not me, it really is the organ. When these instruments start to fall to pieces, they really do sound like human voices breaking. That's what makes them so emotional. I knew I'd need to do something different here. So I sketched out a piece of music using those 4 chords and a melody. Billy went to get his guitar, and while he practiced, I went outside to take photos as I normally do, and something extraordinary happened. What had started as sunshine and a light breeze turned ever windier, stormier, the clouds darker, and eventually the rain came pouring down. It seemed the perfect match to my piece, an ode to a friendless church. Ode to a Friendless Church, composed and performed inside St. Mary's. I was trying my best to avoid all the notes that didn't work or the ones which were out of tune, but you could still hear them there. That really is the only piece of music you can play on that harmonium, something specially tailored. So to finish the programme, I had to enlist the help of some other organs that I know well. Firstly, I went back to Lover Church, which is also St. Mary's. If you know my channel well, it's one of the best Victorian instruments I've ever played. And my inspiration for this part came of course from Long Critchell, but not from the church itself. Instead, from the rectory next door. This is a building which is extremely famous. It was purchased in 1945 by 3 intellectuals known as the Critchell Boys, and they used it to become what was called the last post-war salon. There is so much information about this for you to read. In fact, a whole book has been written about it. But for now, all that I need to say is that a horde of famous visitors conversed there, discussed there. Creative people like Nancy Mitford, E.M. Forster and Laurie Lee, as well as artists like Graham Sutherland, and perhaps most remarkably, the composer Benjamin Britten visited. Just imagine Britten going inside the Church of St. Mary's to have a listen to the acoustic, sitting down at the old Story and Clark harmonium and playing a tune or two. I had to play something inspired by his work. In fact, the same year that the house was purchased, Britten penned his Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. The subtitle of that piece is Variations and Fugue on a Theme of Purcell. Purcell's Rondo from Abdelaziz, performed at St. Mary's Church in Lover. Before I play one final piece, or rather a flashback, to something I performed last year, I was asked the question in my last video, which was, do you have a job? That's not an intrusive question at all, thank you for asking. The answer is simply no. I've never worked as anything else other than a musician. I had a job last year playing as a funerals organist in a crematorium, but I was made redundant and my replacement was a machine which plays recordings. Make of that what you will. The main point here is that although I do enjoy going out to these churches, I burn a lot of diesel and I cover a lot of miles doing so. It is really helpful to wake up with some sense of financial security. That, my friends, is why I made that PayPal link, because it's very important to me. It's the best and safest way of donating to support my work. Yes, you are funding cheese and pickle sandwiches, but what you're really funding is a product which is seen by tens of thousands of people every single week, which I'm quite proud of, but it does cost a lot to produce these films. So, if you donate a small amount to help me, that donation will go directly to me to support my work. It won't go to YouTube or anywhere else. And you know, I will be extremely grateful. Let's end with something mighty and grand, something heavy duty, and again inspired by the church at St. Mary's, Long Critchell. I didn't mention that the organ there was actually imported from Chicago. You might have seen it was built by Story and Clark, who were very, very prominent on the scene of making pianos and harmoniums at the end of the 19th century. These instruments don't need tuning, they're extremely practical and not very expensive. Just as that organ was imported from Chicago to serve in Dorset, isn't it incredible that so many pieces of music have transferred all over the world and gained a whole new significance to all kinds of people? So it seems apt to play you a hymn that was composed in America. Now, the title when I uploaded this video last year was something foolish like one of America's greatest hymns, and a commenter last week astutely said this: "This hymn does not belong to America, it belongs to the world." So here, from St. Martin's Church in Salisbury, is Nearer, My God, to Thee. So that brings this video to a close. One of my all-time favourites, actually. I absolutely loved that church of St Mary's in Long Critchell. There was a real haunting atmosphere about it, and I will be certainly going back again, as I hope you will. I'll also this week be arranging the Ode to the Friendless Church for an organ solo performance, so make sure you subscribe to my channel so that you can see that. It's just as simple as clicking the subscribe button beneath the video. And I must say, mentioning it last week really had an effect, because I think I've gained about 1,000 subscribers in less than a week. So thank you very much, everybody. On that note, I wish you a wonderful and fulfilling week, and I can't wait to see you next time.